A while back we made a podcast. It was where I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine, someone who I have a ton of respect for about leadership and performance as an individual, and his name is Donnie Mackay. And what we spoke about was, how do you lead high-performance employees? Because we both recognise that, in our careers, we've had a whole range of different types of, performance levels in the employees that have worked for us. And the way that you lead the high-performance ones is different than the way that you would lead the general run-of-the-mill employee. But we never really got to refine the conversation to the point where we spoke about kind of the other part of this, and that is, how do you work for a high-performance leader? It's the upward piece. Because, I know from my experience that working for a high-performance leader is way different than working for someone who's, fairly run-of-the-mill, more management-oriented, behaviour managing is probably the correct term for it. And, my performance was different for both of those. Not always the right performance, but it was different, nonetheless. So this podcast is about that topic. How do you work for a high-performance leader? How do you make yourself valuable to those people? Because these are the people who are going to mentor you, that are going to drag you along. They're going to take you around through their network if you can show the value that you put on the table and you deliver to them. So enjoy the podcast. If I go back to the 1970s, I remember I got a piece of advice from a guy. I can't even remember who it was at the time, but the piece of advice has stuck with me forever. And it was this: work like you're earning twice as much, because pretty soon you will be. And I never could shake that thought out of my head, but the effect of it on me, because I believed in the concept, was that I had a different view of service. I had a different view of what I did to earn my pay on a daily basis. I was never affected by the idea that, here's your job description and that's all you do. Anything outside of that you wouldn't do. I never had that thought. So regardless of whether I worked in the government or in private enterprise, I worked like I was earning twice as much. And in many cases, I made those jumps. Now, it's interesting because I take it forward to the 90s. Now, in the period between the 70s and towards the mid-90s, I made some really good progress in terms of, my career. I got promoted. I was given every single job I ever applied for, which to this day, sticks with me as a bit of an achievement, I guess. But more importantly, when I got into government employment in the police service, I remember I got promoted really rapidly as well within the government service. So it wasn't necessarily related to anything specific, industry-wise. It was obviously because I was doing something different. And when I worked in the police service, I got promoted super quickly to the level of senior sergeant. And at that time, it was the fastest that anyone had ever made senior sergeant in the Queensland Police Service. Now, is that good or bad? A lot of people criticise that type of thing because they say you don't have the experience. I don't necessarily agree. I think some people are ready for things earlier than others. In my case, I thought I was a high-performance employee and able to take on the role and do it and execute it fairly effectively. But aside from that, I made these jumps and these progresses. When I went to BHP, the same thing happened again. I got 6 jobs in 6 years through promotion and being given problems to go and solve. And so there was something I was obviously doing well. Now, I go back to the 90s. It was interesting because at that time I had the opportunity to work for a couple of really high-performance leaders that to this day have kind of stuck with me. One of the guys was Bob Watson, who was my direct boss at the time. I was a senior sergeant, he was an inspector, and his boss's name was Bob Atkinson. And Bob Atkinson went on to become the Commissioner of the Queensland Police. And these two guys were really strong mentors of mine and people that I could go to for direction and guidance. And I had a tremendous amount of respect for both of them, and I consider them to be extremely high-performance people. So as I got to that point, I realised that my performance for them would have to be different in order for me to, deliver service to them and deliver value in a way that they perceived it to be, what they wanted. So, I put a lot of energy into understanding what all that was. So what I want to do in this podcast is I want to run through 6 specific things that I can give to you that you can think about in terms of how you position yourself as value adding to your boss. How do you become more valuable to the people that you work for, particularly the high performance ones? And I'll run through the 6 here, and I think you'll find that they're fairly easy to execute and do something with. Number one, and this is the most important thing, of all, you need to understand the role of, your role in serving others, and you've got to serve the big picture. The mistake a lot of employees make is that they think in terms of right and wrong. They'll go and present an idea to their boss. Their boss will say, listen, I got a different idea. And the employee gets their nose out of a joint because, the idea that they've got has been rejected and the boss has got their idea on top of it. And there's this focus on whether you're right or wrong as opposed to service. See, I've always had this view that I can contribute to the idea. I can put my ideas, put them forth towards, in front of the boss. And if the boss rejects those, I don't have a problem with it. I'm never so attached to an idea that it affects me emotionally, right? It might be disappointing if I put time and energy into it, but I'm never so attached that it gets me down, because I believe that you can throw these ideas forward. That's part of the process, but your job is to serve the person in front of you. Your job is to serve them in them achieving their objectives. And if you have that view, that service view, which isn't limited to leadership by any means. It's the same in business. Your goal in business is to serve the customer and help them achieve an outcome. If you can do that, you're going to get the custom of these people. And it's the same in working for leaders. Your job is to serve them in helping them get an outcome. And the outcome is the thing that they're targeting, their objectives, their KPIs, whatever the case may be. You do that, you deliver service, you become valuable to, in this case, the leader. Out in private enterprise, you become valuable to the customer. So serve the big picture, and keep that in mind. Your job is to serve their objectives. Number two, keep them informed. Now, what I mean by this, what I don't mean by this is that you constantly on the phone, you're sending them emails and telling them in full detail what you're doing. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is there are situations where you need to clear what's in their mind. And it works like this. Like if you think about the current times, we're going through this pandemic, and it can be quite serious in business, and our business is under pressure as well, like almost every other business out there. In fact, I dare say every business, not almost every. And things go through my head so that, the girls in the office, I'll say to Sheena and Rhonda, can you do this? Or I'll give them a checklist of things. Now, those ideas, they move from, planned action to, if you think in terms of a Trello board, they move from planned action to in action or underway. So they're sitting on this checklist, sitting on this board where they're underway. In my brain, they're kind of hovering in that space. If I don't get information back that they've been cleared, then it sits on the inaction or the underway board. What I need is a little piece of information that allows me to cross them off so they move to the completed board, if that makes sense. And this is the way that you would deal with, a high-performance leader, because a high-performance leader will be able to delegate tasks and get people to do them. But when they're important tasks in business, they don't lose sight of these things. They're kind of floating around here. And what you need to do is constantly proactively clear their checklist. Gives them mental clarity, gives them the ability to focus their attention on other things without all of this clutter in their brain. So there you have it. Keep them informed proactively. Let's go to number three. Look for the positives in things. Now, the reason I say this is if you're the kind of person who sees the glass as being half empty, if you have a natural tendency to see the negatives of things, well, there are situations where that works. You're going to be very good at risk auditing, very good at seeing fault in things, very good at finding the problems and bringing into play conversation about what you do to manage risks and those downsides. But if that's the only pattern of behaviour you have, you become a high maintenance person, right? By looking at for the positives in things, it puts you in a different place emotionally, right? It's more upbeat, it's more positive. And positive people are drawn to positive people. High performance leaders are mostly very positive people. They're people who look for the good in things as well as the downside and the bad. They're able to flip between the two. But they're not the kind of people who are just sucked into seeing the downside of everything. They don't get up in the morning and go, oh, it's raining, today sucks. They're generally people who get up in the morning and go, look at that, it's raining. And the plants are getting watered. And that gives me time to go and do a workout indoors or spend a bit of time with the family or something. There is an upside to everything. And if you're one of these people who are able to identify that in every situation, you become much lower in terms of how much energy people expend in maintaining you. Because if they've got to pick you up all the time, it's very difficult because it's sapping the energy of other people. So look for the positives in everything, and get in that habit. Let's go to number 4. Anticipate what's coming up. You would have heard, or you may have heard, I should say, the idea that leaders, different positions in organisations should focus on different time spans. And I think there's some theory about this. It's called time span of discretion. And it means something like, the operator would focus on a 1 to 2 day time frame. They're working today and they're working out what they're doing tomorrow. The supervisor's thinking in a 1 week time frame, and they're thinking about what we're doing today right through to Friday at the end of the week. Then the superintendent or the manager is thinking in terms of 1 week to 1 month or 3 months out, and then so on and so on. So it kind of builds up. Now, the trap that a lot of leaders fall into is they get so time compressed that time compression puts them into a 1, 2, 3 day time span. And it means they're asking for things with 1 day's notice or asking for things with 2 days' notice. Now, the moment the leader gets compressed in that time and they say, listen, can you get me this report by tomorrow afternoon or something, we're compressing every single person below us into that time zone. We're squeezing them into a time span of discretion that is too short, and no one's ahead of the game. What you can do to help leaders, particularly high-performance leaders who are, under the pump, they've got a ton of stuff on their plate and they start to get trapped in this time span, is to anticipate what's coming up. Now, to give you an example of this, when I worked in BHP, I used to go to my boss, and I would do this on a regular basis, pretty much once a week. I would, in preparation for my plans about what's going to happen in the next week in our department, I would ask the question of my boss, what's coming up on the calendar over the next 3 months to 6 months that I need to be aware of? And I always remember the response was going to be, how the hell would I know? And it struck me as, probably not the right response, because we need to be ahead of the game in terms of time, but everyone was compressed in that situation in that organisation. So I would dig deep, ask about things that I know are going to come up at some point. When is the budget you think is going to be due? When are we going to be looking at the business planning? When are we going to be doing safety audits and risk audits and things like that? So there are routine and regular things that are definitely going to come up on the calendar, and you need to be proactive about those. If you're proactive in terms of understanding when they're coming up, ahead of the game, right, you're expanding your time horizon, you're expanding your time span of discretion, and what that allows you to do is progressively work towards delivering an outcome for that particular topic and not doing it in the last minute. You've worked in organisations where budgeting is done in that 1 month of every year or 1 week of every year, and everything is dropped and everyone just goes to the budget. And to this day, I still scratch my head about that, because when I worked in the corporate world, I had a different view of it. I had a view that if the budget was due out here, I'm going to progressively be starting to build it back here. And rather than, do it all in this time block here, I would spread it out thinly across a longer period of time. And it meant I'm always delivering budgets on time without stress. So, anticipate what's coming up, ask your boss what's coming up, help them get into a, larger, more extended time span of discretion, and that's going to serve everyone. Let's go to number 5. Bring your boss options, not requests. Now, this is an important concept, because if you go to your boss and you say, and this is particularly important for really senior people, if you go to your boss and you say, listen, I've got this idea, and the idea is, we're going to come up with red pens, not blue pens, and whatever. Is it okay if I do it? Well, basically, that is a request. What you're seeking is permission to do it or not do it. What you're better off doing is going to the person and letting them make a decision on the option, not whether or not you can or can't do this request. And the way that works would be this. You would say, listen, I've got, there's a couple of things we can do. We've got some problems with, pens. And the options we're looking at are these. First of all, we could do nothing. Okay, option A is do nothing, and what that will mean is we stay where we are, we exist with the current problems. Option 2 is we could replace them with red pens, and the red pens are going to give us these benefits. Or option 3, we're going to go to green pens or something. And what I've done in that case is I've positioned options. The minimum options I would give is do nothing or do the red pens, because it gives the leader above you a choice between options. That is way different than if you say, can I do this, yes or no? One's permission and one is allowing them to decide on the options. And this is a concept you need to remember. High performance people, smart people, they have a natural tendency to be more, feel included, or, feel more bought into the process if they choose the option. And look, that one thing there, that will serve you well in any organisation. Let's go to the last one. And that is give early warning or early notice if you're going off track. If you've been given a task, right, a lot of people fall into the trap of, I've got to do this task and I've got to deliver it by, the 30th of the month. And as they get closer and closer, they realise they're not going to make it. So there's all this stress and they panic and they're trying to fix it and they get it here. And they get to that very point of the deadline, but they haven't involved their boss. Well, here's the problem. If I give you a task and I say, listen, let's agree when we're going to get it done by. It's going to be done by the end of the month. And you say, yep, I'm going to hold you accountable to that. But if you come up to me and you say, listen, I'm falling behind, boss, right? I don't think I'm going to make it. It is now my role to serve you. And this is where that servitude or servant leadership comes into play. It's my job to go back to you. And this is the high performance leader's approach. Okay, we're not on track. What can I do to help you get back on track? I work for you. And if you give these people sufficient notice, they're more likely to do that. The second part of this is, when you give early warning of, look, I don't think we're going to make this target. I need help. Ask for the help that you need. Ask and you'll probably receive. And a lot of employees, first of all, as I said, they tend to wait till the last minute. Well, now they're in trouble because now they're going to be held accountable for the goal. The second thing is they fail to ask. And ask and you shall receive. Just get in there and ask people for favours and support and whatever the case may be. And if ever you get a chance, listen to or read the information we've got about moments of persuasive opportunity, right? Keep that in mind, MOPOs, because it relates to the idea that you can set this up so you can ask for favours by giving favours well and truly early. And just keep that in the back of your mind, because I know that we'll have some podcast about this. There's some stuff in some of the presentation and pitching information we deliver. Let me run through those again. That's the 6. Remember to serve the big picture. Your job is to serve them in achieving their outcomes. And that applies, to private enterprise where you're working with customers. Number 2, keep them informed. Get those things that are floating around in their brain off their mental checklist so that you give them mental clarity. Number 3, look for the positives in everything, right? It's good to look for the negatives and the downside and the risks with things, but don't forget the upside, because a person who is more positive in their outlook is easier to get on with. They're low maintenance. Let's go to number 4, anticipate what's coming up. Get ahead of the game. Get yourself ahead of the game, because that will help your boss get ahead of the game, particularly if they're, under the pump. Number 5, bring them options, not requests, for whether or not you can do something. Throw the options on the table, let them choose the options. And the minimum you would do is, we could do nothing and problem remains, or we could go with option A. Your choice. And the last one is, give them early notice that you're off track, and don't forget to ask for help as you move along there. It's their job to serve you once you get to that point. And with that, I'm done. The only thing I'm going to leave you with is this: if you're a high performance leader, right, these things are probably going to resonate well with you. Take the time to listen to the podcast about how you manage high performance employees, because there are challenges with that, and there are also huge benefits if you get that right. So there you have it. I'm done. And if you want more information about what we do, we've got a platform called 9skillsfactory.com, and it's our platform for delivering high-performance education to people who are committed to enhancing their careers, achieving their career potential, setting themselves up for promotion in the future and getting jobs, in tough times. And it's also there for people who want to make a difference in the organisations they work within, problem solving, influencing and selling ideas and leading change. So take a look, nineskillsfactory.com. I'd love to serve you in some way as a service provider.